Welcome back, everybody. This is Class 2 of the Craft of Grading for Effects PhD. I'm your instructor, Mike Matusik. Thanks for joining us. Where we left off last class was we were color correcting this underwater footage of this really bizarre looking fish here. And we ended up coming from this raw image here to something that was very, very pushed and very crushed, and but a little bit more of a stylized look on this image. So just want to quickly, before I jump to the other three images and kind of try to match these up, I just want to kind of talk about the scopes just kind of briefly and where those kind of come into play and why those are useful. I'll just kind of pull these up a little larger. So, this is a RGB parade scope. Obviously, most colorists won't have these, colorized. It'll be more like this, but just for demonstration purposes, I'll have it red, green, blue. So, and this is a luminance waveform. So this is kind of a combination of RGB and just kind of the overall signal. 0 being clip, obviously, 100 being clip for the whites, and the blacks, 0. And over here we have the vector scope. So, I think I'll bring up scopes in future lessons as well. But just briefly, with the vector scope, it gives you kind of legal values for the different colors. If, for instance, my saturation is like way out of control, it'll tell me there. This footage doesn't have that problem, but obviously you want to stay within the boxes here. But an interesting thing with the vector scope that maybe you don't know is that you can actually use it to balance your image, which is kind of interesting. And just briefly, I'll just kind of describe this. So you can see this is off center, and so if you want to balance it, a lot of people will balance on the waveform on the RGB parade, but the more you keep this kind of trace, as they call it, in the center of the vector scope, that'll help you balance. So it's a good thing when you're playing with your tools, because sometimes when you're just kind of moving tools around, you don't, other than looking at the image, you're like, oh, okay, I'm adding blue to this image, but are you adding blue in the blacks and the mids and the whites? So it's nice to be able to look at the waveform and know that what's happening to the video signal matches what your eye is seeing in the image. So just play around with, contrast, with saturation, and just see what happens on the vector scope, what happens on the waveform, and it's a very helpful tool to kind of analyze the tools in your kind of arsenal, so to speak. So, it's a very technical tool, but it can, it's definitely something that is useful. So I would just suggest just play with it, look at it, and kind of learn to know how to use it, to benefit, the final image. Because if I go back to this image, it's pretty dense, and I look at the luminance waveform, and my signal's pretty crushed down here. Again, if it was a feature film and it was something that was a little moodier, a little more unsettling, like I said, Jaws is about to come in and just like bite this thing in half, that would be okay that it's a little denser. But if it's maybe it's a documentary, the signal's probably a little low. But for purposes of this, we're going to leave it there. So that's just kind of a little brief overview of scopes. I'll probably bring them up in other lessons where I can kind of show you some useful tips on how to use scopes to kind of benefit your color correction. So I'll switch back over to my GUI to its normal view here. And so this is where we left off in the last class. We gave it a pretty stylized, crunchy look. We brought out the color in the fish to kind of make it kind of the hero of the shot here. And so now we're going to go to the other three shots in the sequence and try to see what we want to color first. And what I would suggest is if you have a still store, if you have a place to save your color corrections, definitely go ahead and grab that and save that. Because you're going to want to reference that quite a bit And also before I start on this next image, because this is probably where I'm going to go next. I really like this image. I think this looks really cool. It's kind of a surreal kind of vibe there. So what I'm going to try to do is kind of get these in the same ballpark. So this has much more water in it, and I'm going to try to get those blues to kind of line up. And what you're going to find is when you set a hero shot on your hero shot, you're going to kind of play off the other shots, So I'm going to get this in a place. I'm going to say this looks really cool. This shot doesn't match, but I think I like the way this shot looks better. Then you're going to go back to this shot and tweak it and kind of meet them in the middle a little bit. So don't automatically just match every shot to the other one, because maybe this shot will take me in a place that I like better. So if you have a certain look in mind, say there's some some film that you really like the look of, it's not a bad idea to have a frame of that, kind of as a reference to kind of guide kind of your look in your direction. But this stuff, we're just kind of this look's going to come out of our heads here, so we're just going to kind of have fun with it. So again, I'm going to throw my preset stack on there. I got my base layer, my look layer. All right, so I got my next shot that I'm going to try to get into this ballpark here. So again, somehow save a frame grab of that somehow. However, your most color correction software, you can have a still store of some sort, or at least have a poster frame of a shot that you can match to. So I'm going to take this one because it has a nice shot of that fish. So in my base layer, I'm going to pull out some of that green, try to dial in some of those blues. And again, some of our look was a little bit more on the desaturated side, so I'm not going to go too far with saturating those blues yet. So then I'll add bring a little density in there. And as you can see, with underwater footage, it's kind of getting that haze out of there. It's almost like put on a polarizer on there or something. It just kind of gets that haze out of there and kind of crisps it up a little bit. A common theme with colorists can be, color correcting through, fog or a haze is sometimes a little tricky, or steam, and not much, very similar to this kind of environment. But I must say this is actually easier because over the years I've color corrected a lot of underwater of a pool footage, and you'll have people swimming in the water, and they have the underwater camera, and their flesh tones go really purple, or get these really weird reflections off the bottom of the pool. And a lot of times the client wants those flesh tones to look like they're not in the water, so it's very tricky to color correct underwater. And then the camera, you get it looking really great under the water, and the camera pops out of the water, and all of a sudden your correction's kind of ruined. So you got to kind of track shapes along the water's edge and color correct the sky to look right. So I definitely like staying underwater is actually much easier than bobbing up and down. So let's see here. So I got my base layer. I added a little density. I took the green out. Let's double check our hero frame. So actually that water is actually getting pretty close. But this has a lot more black, a lot more kind of crushed blacks going on there. So it's, which you're not feeling here. So there's a couple ways you could tackle that. You could just go to my look layer, and I'll just kind of crush it down and see where that takes us. Just kind of, it's definitely getting into the a little bit moodier zone here, which is pretty cool. I got more blues in there. And like I said, don't be afraid of if you take this shot, your next shot, into a place that makes you happier with your correction, then feel free to go back to the other shot and change that up. I'm going to add a little more green in there, desaturate it. And this is an interesting time when I'm talking about saturation, to be conscious of where you're using your saturation when you're desaturating, because then if you're there's pre and post saturation. So if I desaturate before my color balance, then I'm going to be essentially putting that balance on, a wash over a desaturated image. So be careful where you're desaturating, because it'll actually affect, it'll have some interesting effects on your color balance. So typically, if you just want to do a straight desaturate it, you'll want to desaturate after your color balance. So just keep that in mind. Some color correction, like the Nucoda Film Master, literally had a pre and post saturation. The Baselight has multiple places where you can add or take away saturation, so it's more of a conscious decision. It's not labeled as pre and post, but just keep that in mind. So again, so it's getting kind of in that spot, but it's not feeling. Doesn't have the mood, it's not as quite as interesting as that. So maybe we'll bring a little bit of tone to the top, because it just feels kind of flat up there. So, I have a preset shape, or power window, or toilet bowl, as some people say. However you want to name it is fine with me. There's other terms for it that I can't say on air, but so it's kind of, so it's interesting. I mean, just by taking that haze off the top, my eyes kind of getting pulled down, and it's starting to look kind of interesting here. So this is starting to feel like a movie I want to watch, which is a good thing. So let's kind of play through that a little bit. So you can see where we started and where we're at. And again, looking at my scopes, my overall signal is pretty low. So it's definitely in the moody arena. It's but I think that's where we're taking this sequence. So like I said, you don't want to spend too much time on a shot. You kind of want to, it's in the ballpark. Let's move on to the next shot. Clients, especially with clients sitting there, they get bored after 5 minutes. You know what I mean? So it's like, if you're kind of close on a shot, move on. And the beauty of nonlinear color correction and workstation-based color correctors is, you can do the whole piece, and then review it all together. In the telecine days, you would start with roll one, put up a roll. Maybe there's one shot on that roll. You would color correct it off film, and if the client says, "I like that," you have to match the rest of the rolls. And if they change their mind, you'd have to hang the roll of film, and it was just this big fiasco. So it's just it's amazing what being able to jump from one shot to the next, and then being able to go back later and change it. It's it's somewhat of a new concept in color correction, which is hard to believe. But so. What shot do I want to do next? Let's just continue on. The next shot of the sequence is this school of fish. I'm not up on my species of fish. I have no idea what those are, but they look like baby barracudas, but I know they don't swim in schools, so let's start up there again. This one, again, start with my base. I'm just going to pull a little green out. It doesn't need too much density. So I'll leave that base there. Sometimes your base is going to have, a huge difference on the image, and sometimes you're not going to add too much to it, but it's nice to kind of have your look layer reference kind of a clean, just kind of straight up looking image. So you want to be able to pull your look layer off and show the client this is what the image kind of looks like, just normal, this is before it looks awesome. The base layer is just kind of normal. So now in our look layer, we're going to crunch it down. And obviously this is a little deeper ocean, I guess you could say. I mean, there's not much light there, except for the reflections off the fish. So again, you can really see it really falls off. Like I could see a client saying, hey, your vignette's a little too strong there, and I'd tell them, no, I don't have a vignette on there. That's just the way it's shot. But we can fix that though. Let's kind of get it somewhere interesting. And again, these don't have to match perfectly. In a sequence like this, they're obviously totally different. So if you just get them in the same world, they don't have to like be perfectly matched. So maybe the center looks pretty cool, but it's starting to fall off pretty dark on the other side. It's which isn't. It gets a little muddy, and if you heard that term muddy, it's a bad term. You don't want your footage to look muddy. So, but what does that mean? I'll bring up my trusty scopes. So, usually muddy means your midtones. Kind of the meat of your image is kind of dark. And they say down in the mud because you can go back to your overall signal. It's kind of down in the mud. It's kind of just dark. So, I would say this image is starting to get a little muddy, kind of on the edges here. It's not too bad up in this middle top section, but on the edges it's getting a little muddy. So let's fix that. So the way I would do that is I would draw a shape, power window, kind of in the center there, and then feather it out to kind of match the fall off of the darkness. So let's put this shape up there, feather it out quite a bit. Somewhere around there is nice. Then I can color inside, outside. I'm going to color outside of this shape. And again, I have lift, gamma, gain on the outside. And here, it's kind of a mix of, do I use the lift, gamma, or gain for this? And it's kind of a little bit of both. It's kind of like, right now I'm just shifting the mids up, and it's really pulling. I don't want to lose it totally because that gives it depth, having a little bit of, it's not perfectly exposed across the frame, but, it's definitely less muddy now. So let's just see how that looks. Let's see, so that's, we almost call that a reverse vignette, where you're actually, typically with a vignette, you're kind of pinching the corners and darkening it up. But on the occasion, you're actually going to do the opposite, and you're going to brighten the edges. And this is one of those cases. So that's interesting. So as you can see in the original, these fish have some kind of a magenta cast, and that's probably what their scales kind of look like, but I'm pulling it out and kind of bluing them up, and let's just give them a little more contrast. And so in Baselight I have lift, gamma, gain, and they have a certain, they handle, the lift kind of affects kind of the midtones, the mids kind of affect the whites and the blacks, and the gain actually affects the mids quite a bit. So they overlap is what I'm trying to say, the lift, gamma, gain. So there's another, and so that's a different kind of curve set for those lift, gamma, gains. And so the Baselight has a second set of lift, gamma, gain controls that they're more focused. So just for fun, I'll show you. So now I just switched my lift, gamma, gain controls to a different sensitivity. So now the blacks are a little bit more controlled on black, and then the mids don't affect the blacks or the whites quite as much. So what I'm doing is I'm kind of crunching the blacks down just a little bit and stretching the mids up and kind of just pulling it out of the mud a little bit. And again, because I have a scratch pad, I can kind of save that, get rid of it to see, so I can A/B where we were. So you can see it's just a nice way to kind of do a little mid stretch. And you can do that with curves. You can do that, if you have, if you can control how your lift gamma gain works. And it's a way to do that. So I kind of like that. It's a little bit more up, and let's just kind of see how that plays together with the first shot. Just going to play it through. For some reason, my footage doesn't cache very quickly. And again, I think you don't want to spend too much time, before you kind of work through it, and then you can play all 4 shots together and just see how they feel. And again, maybe you like one shot over the other, and you kind of match them together. And again, I'm basically using a lot of mostly primaries, using some shapes to kind of isolate areas, and not too much secondary work. That feels okay. Again, coming through here, it feels really washed out. Now it has some nice contrast, nice pop. So that's working okay. So let's just jump to this last shot, and let's try a different technique on coloring this shot. Let's use, again, I'll drop my kind of preset stack on there to get my, the biggest thing with presets too is I have all my layers named, because the seconds it takes to name layers in a session with clients is actually adds up after a while. So I don't have to type in base, look, and curve, a million times on 200 shots. So let's color through a curve. So I got curve grade after my look layer, downstream of my look layer. So just add a little S curve in there. So and I apologize for the Baselight. Again, like I think I talked about in class 1, a little goes a long way. So it's not going to look like an S curve, but it's actually it's doing the S curve thing. It's just it looks more like a flattened S curve, but it's an S curve. So and how that's going to help is it's kind of like a 2D LUT almost. Like, so you're kind of, now that I brought the blacks down a little bit, the whites up in this S curve, when I go back to my look layer, which is before the curve, when I drop the lift, when I drop my blacks down, since it's coloring through that curve, there's going to be a subtle kind of soft clip, and it's not going to be quite as hard. And so now as I bring my whites up, again, it's kind of fun if you look at it on the scopes, and it really just, to me, it visually shows you what that S curve is doing to the image, So as I bring it up, you can see how my white point before it gets to 100 starts just a soft clip. That's what it's doing. So I mean, if I bypass my curve, and now I show you what it looks like without, it just goes straight up linear and just goes clipped and gets nasty. Same with the blacks. So if I turn that curve back on, you can see it just has a gentle kind of soft clip. So it's kind of a nice, kind of a safety net, so to speak. So if you don't want to have to worry about manually softening your whites so they're not clippy, it's kind of nice. And it also lets you, it changes how the way your gamma reacts. And it's something that I can try to tell you, but it's something you really need to feel. It's something you need to play with. So drop an S curve on there, color correct through it with lift gamma gain, and just see how it feels. And I use it sometimes, and sometimes I don't. So it's just some colors have the same techniques, no matter what footage they use. I kind of see what I like per shot. So this particular set of footage, I'm going to use S curves. I'm going to use sometimes I don't use an S-curve. Sometimes I just use a curve to kind of boost the mids, and that feels pretty nice. So there's different ways to use it. But again, I'm going to start back with my base. And this shot, I'm going to color. So again, I'm going to color through a curve. So again, I'm going to bring the blacks down, bring the whites up with my curve, and then go back. That's interesting. And so again, now I go back to my hero shot. Let's crush the blacks a little bit. Desaturate. Again, I'm kind of, because I have a panel, I can quickly go from lift, gamma, gain, color differential with the trackballs, and I can quickly kind of play with all the balances of those three regions, and very quickly, so but what I would recommend is push it around, I kind of know the limits of it, but crush it down, push a lot of, push the blacks around, see where you like it, there's nothing wrong with that, you don't know until you do it. So you can see actually how warm we are now. I pushed this really blue. This is pretty warm, but again, we desaturated it, so it sucked that blue out of it. So let's kind of get back in that world. We're not looking for Finding Nemo. We're looking for we're looking for Jaws 3D 2000 or something. Let's do that, and let's kind of see where this little guy goes. I'm feeling like we need a little vignette on this guy here, so it's nice. The more you kind of play with it, I'm just kind of crunching down the edges, and now this feels more like deep ocean, feels a little more menacing, feels like some lights coming through here, and I'm just using basic oval shape, if you want to get a little fancy, you can kind of move these around, but right now I'm just going to keep it more generic and just kind of see where it goes. Again, it's pretty crushed there, but that's kind of the mood we're going for. That's where the client was happy. Again, this one we just did real quick. I used an S-curve, and I think I can only describe it so much. I think you just need to try it, feel it, and see how you like. Kind of it changes the way lift, gamma, gain works. But I quickly dialed that in, and let's just kind of watch it from the top and see where we're at. So, so far it's feeling okay. I think let's step through that. I'm just looking at something that jumps out. Is it the tones, the colors? Right here it's kind of going by. It's getting super crushed. I don't like that, so I'm gonna have to fix that. Now you see the bubbles come by, and it lifts it up a little bit. but you don't want to get too detailed until you know if it's working or not, you know. So, it has a cool vibe. It's not Discovery Channel underwater footage. It's a little something else going on. So, there's a few sections you may want to tweak. It gets a little dark there, but that's okay. We can easily take care of that. But cool. So so have fun with this footage. I kind of just was using this footage as kind of a basis to talk about some different tools, some different ideas. But have fun with it. Post what you've done in the forums, and by all means, make it look way cooler than what I did. Give me some questions, some feedback, and like I said, have fun with it. All right, so we'll also make available the footage for the first color challenge, which is footage from a Coca-Cola spot with Creative by Joey L. and Variable. So you can download that now. And just make sure you have your submissions in by the end of week 4, because we will review them in week 5. But just for fun, what I'd like to have you guys think about is submit, do 2 passes on it, for fun. So when you see the footage, whatever comes to your mind, whatever kind of creative vision you have for it, just push that look, have fun with it. But then once you're happy with that, I want you to do a completely different pass on it. Say the first pass is crunchy and desaturated and graphic. The next pass, go softer with it. Make it like super flat and, give it a different vibe. Give it, I get clients that come in all the time and say, I want the Instagram look, which is kind of funny. They want the iPhone, app look. But, do something fun with, but just totally different. I don't want it to be anywhere near what the first pass was like. And just, hopefully that'll push, being pushed in a separate direction can open up some new ideas for some different techniques. So I think that'll be fun, and thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week. Thanks.